Welcome to Non-Beta Alpha. I'm Ryan Morfin. On today's episode, we have Miguel Diaz Gallardo, the CEO of Bacabes, an e-commerce retailer in Mexico City. Today, he's going to share a little bit about what's going on economically in Mexico, as well as how they're handling the coronavirus. This is Non-Beta Alpha.
I guess I didn't know. I didn't know.
Miguel, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. It's a pleasure.
Well, you're calling in from Mexico City, and part of our COVID Insights series, we've been talking to friends from around the world who are in the business community, talking about some of the insights they can share about what's happening with the coronavirus in their country. So we'd love to hear a little bit about, what's going on the ground in Mexico City with coronavirus.
Sure, fantastic. Well, Mexico, the first thing I think we need to give some context to the issue. I mean, just to understand what's going on in terms of COVID-19. Mexico is a country where about 60% of population, of working population, actually works in the informal sector. And that means basically that they don't have access to the public health system because they don't pay taxes, And it's also important to understand that this 60% of working population, they live on a daily basis. That means basically that they need to go out to the streets and sell, they sell tacos, they clean the houses of people, they work in the construction sector, building things. So they cannot stop, right? Because they don't have things like savings or things like that. So it's this part of the population, it's really hard to. I mean, they simply cannot perform their works at home, so they have to go out. And I think that the relevant thing about this is that the Mexican government decided to implement the so-called Sentinel model, which means that the government is performing very, very few COVID tests. Since this started, like the first case in Mexico was, I think, the last week of February. And since then, in Mexico, we have performed only 90,000 tests overall. This is lower than the number of daily tests performed in the US, So, I mean, the government claims that this is enough to measure the trend of the pandemic. But the numbers, well, that it's a very small sample, and we know for a fact that there are more cases out there and more people dying from COVID-19.
So have people, and I think we're probably 2 to 3 weeks ahead of Mexico from kind of the curve, the pandemic curve. Have people been following similar types of social distancing norms where they stay home from work? Or I know you just mentioned 60% of the population can't afford to do that, but the people who can, have you seen the business community stay home and try to work remotely?
Yeah. So the 40% definitely is. So when you go around the high-end neighborhoods in Mexico City, the people is on a lockdown, voluntary lockdown, because there isn't an enforced lockdown in Mexico. But if you go out, and I'm a business owner, so I sell shirts and menswear like this one, and my warehouse is in a poor neighborhood in Mexico City. I was there last week, and people there is like I told you, like it's out there working in manufacturing plants. In distribution centers of groceries, so people there are like having a normal life, right? And you can see Google made public an analysis by country on mobility, and Mexico mobility hasn't decreased as much as of course Spain and Italy, but not even close to Argentina or Chile or Peru, right? So mobility here it hasn't stopped. and I think we can see a problem there in the future, because then there's the poor people that is going to get sick. Actually, it's happening now in Mexico City. The two main alcaldías or neighborhoods affected are two of the poorest alcaldías in the city. So we could have a problem there in the near future.
No, that's very interesting. And have a lot of the factories been closed voluntarily, or are they being forced to close by the government?
So the government separated businesses into essential business and non-essential businesses, and they encourage non-essential businesses to close. And essential businesses are basically grocery stores, supermarkets, drugstores, um, things like that. Just to be able to buy food and survive during the crisis. E-commerces as well, by the way. You can operate warehouses of e-commerce sites. So but the government, on the other hand, is not enforcing the closure of the stores and offices. So there are companies still working, normally in Mexico City. One of the main examples is one of the biggest groups in Mexico, Grupo Salinas, which owns TV Azteca, for instance, the second biggest TV TV company in Mexico. They're still working. Some department stores are still working, and so it's not mandatory. But most of companies, especially those international businesses, international corporations, are on a voluntary lockdown. We closed stores, we closed offices, and people are in a lockdown. Those that can, right?
And you're the CEO and founder of Bacabes, which is a men's e-commerce store, which I did go to the website. I will be ordering some clothes there for sure. But where do you guys produce them in Mexico? Are they produced in Asia? Where are the clothes produced?
Right. So we produce in Mexico, but we import the fabrics from China. So yeah, we're seeing a disruption in the supply chain for sure. The textile manufacturers are closed; they are non-essential. So my producer is closed at the moment, and surely we will suffer an affection on the supply chain from there, right?
Yeah, that's where I was. That's where I was going with that, is the supply chains. And in the U.S., we're really focused on one supply chain in particular, which is food. How have the supermarkets been well stocked? Do you guys feel comfortable with the food access? And then, what percentage of Mexicans maybe have a garden in the back or have other ways to have local food produced?
Right. So agriculture is essential. Distribution of food is essential, and grocery stores and supermarkets are essential. So basically, the supply of food is secured. There is no shortages on anything related to food. Beers are not essential, so you can see a shortage of beer in Mexico, and that's causing some issues. People upset about that. But in terms of food, it's just fine, and I don't see any issues there in terms of food, right?
Well, since you brought up, I was gonna say, since you brought up beer, are Mexicans upset that it's called the coronavirus? I mean, there was some conversation on late night TV here in the U.S. We're gonna have to get a new brand for America's favorite beer, Corona.
Yeah, no, and Corona will have some issues about the name, right? They may be thinking about changing their names. Right.
Sorry, you were going to say the other thing before I interrupted you. I apologize.
Oh, no, don't worry. Yeah, so about your second question, not many people have gardens or something to self-produce their. It's not common here. So especially in the cities. Another important thing, by the way, is that Mexico City has like 30% of total COVID cases in Mexico. So it's very concentrated in Mexico City. And yeah, here people, density is huge. People live in small departments, and there's no space to produce our own, food supplies.
And so do you see that traffic is going down, or do you think it's because mobility is still high that the people are still, there's still traffic in the highways?
It's definitely going down. Traffic is going down for sure. But again, when you go to these places, like not the high end neighborhoods, traffic is super low. But then in other places of Mexico City, you can see not close to a normal traffic, because that's not true, but maybe according to numbers, 40-50% of regular traffic, which is a lot, right? I believe, compared to other countries.
And so for a lot of the employees of a lot of these companies, and that 40% that have jobs and they pay into the government tax program, is there a concept of unemployment like we have here where you can file for unemployment insurance to get money during unemployment?
Yeah, there is, but I mean, it doesn't work as efficient as you guys, and apparently we haven't seen numbers related to that. So after COVID, we know, because the government has said that we just lost the number of employments that were generated during the whole 2019, right? So we will see a crisis in unemployment. But generally speaking, we don't have the resources. The government has also been very clear that they won't put any money to bail out companies. So they trying to use this strategy of giving money directly to people, but giving money directly to people that is not in the formal sector, and most of them are not also in the formal banking system, so they don't have bank accounts. So government has to do that in cash, which is very complicated, and it's you can get a lot of corruption there. So yeah, we have it, but it's not as structured and as in the US. So again, in that matter, we will see, I guess, a lot of problems in the near future in Mexico.
And the health system is a nationalized health system, is that right? So it's a health system run by the government.
Right, and it's managed from the federal government. But again, the public health system is not, I would say, developed. So actually the private hospitals sign a deal with the Mexican government to provide services to those people that have access to the public health system. So you're seeing now private hospitals in Mexico City, some of them, not all of them, but some of them, receiving people from the public health system. This is something that we've never seen before. But again, this initiative was pushed by the private sector. No?
And it was an issue in 2019, and I don't know if it's still an issue. I mean, not to tap dance around a touchy issue, but like immigration into the U.S. and kind of the movement of people, from Mexico to the U.S. One of the things that we were seeing last year was a constant stream of people from Central America. And has that stream continued, or do you see that it's slowing down? Was it slowing down last year and now it's stopped, or are still people migrating through Mexico right now?
Yeah, so I was reading that people keeps coming to Mexico, and again, that's gonna be an issue also. But the truth is that in the public agenda, we haven't seen, we stopped talking about that. You're right that in 2019 that was something that we were listening in the news basically every day, and I haven't listened about that much. But I just read some article in a newspaper that migration from Central America keeps coming, and well, yeah, that's gonna be more problematic for Mexico, I guess.
Yeah, like some of the countries like Guatemala and Nicaragua are not doing a great job at containing this at all. So they're potentially bringing infection rates with them, unfortunately. It seems that President Lopez Obrador and Trump have come to some type of path forward with the trade agreement. What was the dialogue or the mindset in the Mexican business community before COVID started about the trade arrangement that was reached between North America, trade agreement?
So it wasn't. I haven't seen an analysis, a full analysis of the new terms of this trade agreement. Uh, what I've been hearing and people have been hearing here in Mexico is that the new terms actually benefit a lot the United States and not necessarily Mexico. But I guess, I mean, I personally believe that having a trade agreement with the US and Canada is necessary, basically almost in whichever terms that are there in the deal. But we will see right now. Let's see what happens because Mexico depends a lot on certain industries that will be severely hit by COVID-19, right? Like oil, like tourism, like manufacturing, especially in the automotive sector and textile sector, and also remittances from Mexicans working in the U.S. So I think the economy will be severely damaged, and well, let's see also what happens with apparently the trade agreement starts in July, and an American companies are pushing Mexico to put manufacturers, for example, in the automotive sector, in the essential part of the business, so they can go back to work and activate the supply chain. So yeah, let's see what happens. I think it's what I've heard in terms of e-commerce, that it's my area of expertise. That is going to be an interesting agreement, but will increase the competition because it will be easier for Mexicans to buy products from e-commerce sites in the US. So that probably will be. It's nice to have competition, and for us will push us to work harder and add more value to our customers here in Mexico, right?
No, that's an interesting point that it's gonna increase the trade. I think one thing that we're starting to hear about in the U.S. is that to quote several governors, never again will we let our supply chain be so far from home on critical items like pharmaceuticals or medical supplies. We're pretty upset about some of the ways that China has treated American companies that want to bring supplies back to the U.S. They've kind of blocked them, and I think there's a huge opportunity for Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. to nearshore back a lot of this manufacturing. And for whatever reason, I think Mexico is going to be the big winner in that, as American business start to shun China for their behavior during the crisis. But have you guys heard anything about that, or is that on the dialogue there in Mexico at all yet?
Yeah, I heard that argument, and I totally agree with it. Actually, Mexican manufacturers have lost a lot of competitiveness against China manufacturers simply because China is cheaper, right? And this could, balance the equation in favor of Mexico. So yeah, I've heard the argument, and I totally agree with it. Right? Like the thing is that Mexico, in my opinion, the development of the country needs to be more, more into the commercial side of the business instead of. We've been manufacturing our whole history. We've been strong manufacturers, but the real margins of a business is not in the manufacturer side, right? So I guess, and this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, why I'm starting up a company with a tech basis in Mexico. So I believe that we need to add value in the other part of the supply chain, right? Which is the part that actually adds value to an economy instead of just being manufacturing. But yeah, we are manufacturers, and that's definitely going to help in the short term. Yeah.
And do you think, what's your view? I mean, so before the coronavirus, it was about 11% of global commerce was e-commerce. Now the number is somewhere over 90% because of the fact that there's really nothing open to go shop with. What do you think the return to the old model or the old allocation? How long is that going to take? Do you think it's going to change people's kind of fundamental buying patterns, and they're going to want to spend more money online and versus go into a store?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. And so first, in Mexico, it's 2%, not 10, not 11, right? So it's only 2% of total retail sales are completed via e-commerce. So we're in the spot that you guys in the US were 10 years ago, something like that. So we're 10 years behind. It's another way of putting it. Certainly, COVID-19 will accelerate the e-commerce, and will basically accelerate also the death of traditional brick and mortar retail, right? Now, at this point in time, we're seeing some categories going to the roof, and some categories really hurt. Like all the categories related to travel, of course, clothing. Those categories are suffering now, but in general, e-commerce is growing fast. And the most important thing, I believe, is what you just mentioned. Yeah, like consumer behavior is going to change. I believe so. The purchase drivers may not be the same ones that were before COVID. In terms of menswear, for instance, people were looking for a nice fit, looking for price, looking for design, looking for personal attention. And a brand like ours could provide that to our customers. But probably in the near future, I expect these drivers to change a bit, and customers probably will start putting security and safety first, right? So maybe we will see. What I expect is probably becoming going back to more generalist retailers like Amazon, or here in Latin America, Mercado Libre, instead of going to specialized boutiques. That could be a change that I probably foresee. But definitely, consumer behavior is going to change. I'm sure about that.
Yeah, no, we think it's going to change here in the U.S. as well, and I think there's really no guidelines being given by the U.S. government right now about how restaurants should behave and open back up, how retailers should behave to open back up. What are the guidelines? Like, what if somebody comes into a store and is coughing all over a shirt? Like, what do you do with that shirt? Do you leave it on the rack? Do you go put it in the UV closet? So, no, it's an interesting time. Well, I would say that from a Wall Street standpoint, Mexico put on a big hedge for the oil prices a few years ago, and it's going to pay off in a big way. But it's going to be interesting to see. So I think Pemex did a good job of hedging their oil production, whereas Saudi Arabia and Russia are destroying each other. I think it's going to be at least a bright spot for Mexico. What are some of the things that you feel optimistic about with how Mexico is either handling it or just the resilience of the Mexican people?
Well, there is. I feel optimistic. For many reasons, actually. Like, first, there is the demographic bonus that we have. We are a very young country. It's our average age is 27 years old. So and we have 120 million people, right? So we have many young people ready to work and produce, and that's good. I see definitely, like, most of the industries becoming digital, like this transition being accelerated. As I mentioned, Mexico was not digitalizing fast enough in many industries, not only retail, but banking, health, etc. And this crisis will accelerate the transition into digital. And I'm convinced that digitalization of any industry produces, basically, puts democratization into the consumer behavior, right? Like more people have access to those products or services if the industry is digitalized. So we could see, for instance, more Mexicans receiving a formal education, right? Because it will be easier with digital with a digital with a then like an edtech industry or things like that. So digitalization of industries is definitely good for Mexico, will be good for Mexico. And that keeps me optimistic. Now, on the other hand, we should be like very careful to handle this crisis because it could be catastrophic, right? We don't have the resources of other countries like the US or European countries to put into the economy again. So we need to take care of ourselves here, trying not to let many businesses die, helping people that will be unemployed to recover rapidly, or this could become, I would say, catastrophic for the near term in Mexico.
Well, Miguel, we appreciate you coming on the show, and we'd love to check back in with you in a few weeks to see how things have evolved. And we hope that you and your family stay safe, and definitely appreciate your time.
No, thank you for inviting me. It's been really nice. I enjoyed talking to you, Ryan.
Miguel, hope to see you in Mexico City at some point. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching on Beta Alpha. And before we go, please remember to subscribe and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or YouTube channel. This is Non-Beta Alpha. Now you know.
Get busy time.
All price references and market forecasts correspond to the date of this recording. This podcast should not be copied, distributed, published, or reproduced in whole or in part. The information contained in this podcast does not constitute research or recommendation from Non-Beta Alpha Inc., Wentworth Management Services LLC, or any of their affiliates to the listener. Neither Non-Beta Alpha Inc., Wentworth Management Services LLC, nor any of their affiliates make any representation or warranty as to the accuracy or completeness of the statements or any information contained in this podcast, and any liability, therefore including in respect of direct, indirect, or consequential loss or damage is expressly disclaimed. The views expressed in this podcast are not necessarily those of Non-Beta Alpha Inc. or Wentworth Management Services LLC, and Non-Beta Alpha Inc. and Wentworth Management Services LLC are not providing any financial, economic, legal, accounting, or tax advice or recommendations in this podcast. In addition, the receipt of this podcast by any listener is not to be taken as constituting the giving of investment advice by Non-Beta Alpha Inc. or Wentworth Management Services LLC to that listener, nor to constitute such person a client of any affiliate of Non-Beta Alpha Inc. or Wentworth Management Services LLC. This does not constitute an offer to buy or sell any security. Investments in security may not be suitable for all investors. An investment of any security may involve risk and the potential loss of your initial investment. Investors should review all risk factors before investing. Investors should perform their own due diligence before considering any investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Investment products, insurance, and annuity products are not FDIC insured, not bank guaranteed, not insured by a federal government agency, may lose value.